Hi guys from New York. Today I will talk for you with Eric Martindale. Eric is a founder and chief developer behind Fabric. He is a seasoned entrepreneur, has created and sold several companies also in the crypto space, and he is one of the key developers behind some of the crypto projects. So meet with me, Eric Martindale, and stay with me till the end of this video. There will be a contest and something to win. Hi guys from New York, from Consensus 2018. Today I will introduce to you industry veteran in the crypto space you probably haven't heard much about, but I'm pretty sure you will hear a lot in the future. This is Eric Martindale from the Nakamoto Group. Eric, tell me, how and when did you find out about Bitcoin? How did you come to the space?
I was reading the internet forums way back in the day, and I saw this conversation about this weird internet thing called Bitcoin.
Way back in the day means like 2000?
Originally, yeah, 2010 is really like the beginning of when I first started looking at it. And in 2011 is when I really started investigating and learning more about it.
So did you have a cryptology background or programming background at that time?
Yeah, I was a software engineer, and I'd done virtual currencies in the past, so dealing with gaming systems, of course, like World of Warcraft, EVE Online, all of these virtual currencies. So I kind of had looked at Bitcoin with a little bit of a skeptical eye initially, and then when I looked at the technology and kind of figured out what was going on, I was just all in.
So back in the time I talked to Tim Draper, and he actually got interested in Bitcoin also because somebody bought a virtual sword for his son for $40.
Wow.
And he then said, if you pay for virtual goods, you need like something like virtual currency. And then he stumbled upon Bitcoin. So it was similar stuff with you.
Very
right?
similar. I was an entrepreneur, and we were building a virtual worlds platform at the time.
Okay.
So Bitcoin came across my plate because of that. So.
Okay, so 2010, but you actually haven't invested at that time, right, in Bitcoin, or you didn't get involved in Bitcoin?
In 2011, I decided to purchase my first Bitcoin. I was mining as well, but I eventually just decided to purchase some Bitcoin. But I never paid for it with fiat currency. I bought it with Second Life Linden dollars through a virtual currency exchange at the time.
Okay.
So I acquired
But at least what was the price of Bitcoin at that time? You could say
the first time, I shouldn't say, but it was less than $1 when I made my first purchase.
Okay.
So yeah.
So quite a nice return on investment, right?
Yeah, sure.
And especially that you haven't actually invested dollars, right?
Right, exactly. It's been quite nice for me. I mean, I've been self-funding my company for the past couple of years using the proceeds that I earned. So it's been quite helpful.
Okay, so you are entrepreneur yourself. Then you started to developing on the blockchain platform, on the Bitcoin platform.
Yes,
actually.
yeah.
Tell me about your current company, about the Nakamoto Group. What do you do?
Sure. So we're building a decentralized operating system called Fabric, and it's what we call a layer 3 system. You can build applications that are run by the network. There's no server. There's no. It's completely a peer-to-peer way of running a traditional style application, but without having an authority or a single point of failure that operates those contracts. And
so, how does it compare to, let's say, a normal cloud systems, right?
Sure. So a normal cloud system is typically operated by one company that manages the data center.
Okay.
In the case of Fabric, we are creating what's called an information market, or a market for computation, where the contracts that you're creating for running these applications are offered up to the whole network. So rather than uploading your application into a data center and calling it the cloud, I would argue that a system like this is much more like a cloud, because you're basically broadcasting how the system, what you need done, and then people are bidding on that order, and you're getting the cheapest possible order from a much larger network.
For me, it sounds similar to Golem.
Sure, yeah.
Or SONM, Son, right?
Yes, very much so.
What's the USPs of your project, or how is it different from the other approaches?
Great. So we're using something called secure multi-party computations. So the ability to divide a program into multiple subcomponents. So no individual actor actually has visibility into what's taking place. It's a mechanism called homomorphic encryption. So that's one of our differences. But we're also explicitly focused on using Bitcoin as the currency. So we're not trying to launch our own currency. I don't think that actually makes very much sense. Technologically, we want to use something that is secure, something that's already established, and then that will be the currency for our system.
Okay, so you don't plan to ICO, to do an ICO or something like that?
No, I definitely don't plan to do an ICO.
So if you want to, later time of point, to raise money, would you raise through a traditional VC or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe not a traditional VC per se. We would do something like an equity round.
Okay.
We have a much longer term vision of offering our expertise, offering our services inside of an ecosystem that we've created, as opposed to directly benefiting on top of the technology itself. In fact, we plan on declaring all of the code public domain as opposed to copywriting or licensing it.
Okay. We were talking before about Roger Ver losing his money in Bitcoinica in the first big hack, then in Mangox. What about you? Did you suffer from any of these hacks?
I've lost more Bitcoin than I care to admit, but not because of trusting a centralized exchange with my money.
You trusted yourself too much.
I trusted myself too much. Yeah, so I've lost keys. I've had multi-sig accounts, basically where other people have lost the keys, and so it was unrecoverable. But yeah, I'm typically a pretty self-managed person, so I've learned that lesson, and now I'm much more careful and more meticulous about managing it on my own.
Okay. So. You were talking before about a community you have built. This comes out of these gaming worlds.
That's right.
Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So when I was actually just out of high school, I decided to create a collaborative gaming platform where multiple players can come together to build something very akin to the old school MUD, MUD, this multi-user dungeon, where you can construct a virtual world and move around in that virtual world collaboratively using just pure text. So it's very similar to writing code and just building these virtual worlds. So over the past, it's been 14 years almost, we've grown this community of about 150,000 people now that are all building their own little virtual worlds using the platform that I had designed. And this is going to be one of the very first applications that we're going to be migrating it from the old centralized system, which I had built, into Fabric, which is the new decentralized system that I created explicitly for this purpose.
Okay, but for this system, I mean, for people to be able to bid on that, are you using a special currency, or are you using Bitcoin for that, or how does it work?
So we actually have what's called a Bitcoin bonded currency. So you deposit Bitcoin into the smart contract, and then inside of the smart contract, you can call that currency anything you want. And the rules for how that currency operates are governed by the smart contract itself. But it's completely bonded to an underlying Bitcoin. So at any point in time.
So is it like a colored token on Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, it's like a colored coin, but we're not coloring the coin on the original chain.
Okay.
We have a layer 2 system for managing the actual payments. And there's all sorts of rules that can be applied. In fact,
so you actually issued a new currency, but you don't do ICO. You don't raise money for that. But it's somewhere. So how can I get that currency, for example? Only within the system. Right?
You would have to purchase it from someone else who already holds it, or you would deposit Bitcoin into the contract, and you would have represented asset inside.
I understand.
The system.
Okay, now I understand. Okay, so it mirrors the Bitcoins I hold, or that I hold somewhere in this contract.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Okay, let's talk about you more because you worked, as I see, for Blockstream
Yep.
for a while, and this is pretty controversial company, or it became a very controversial company. But you left in May last year,
That's
so
right.
before the, let's say, the Big Bang, right? What were the reasons you left, actually?
Sure. I mean, I wanted to work on Fabric primarily,
Okay.
and I've been working on this technology for a couple of years now. In fact, just before I joined Blockstream, I was planning on launching it as my own company already, but I got a very interesting offer from Blockstream, and so I decided to join. And I was mostly focused on Elements while I was there, which is Blockstream's sidechains platform. But it seemed like the technology wasn't quite where it needed to be. Enterprise and industry adoption wasn't happening in the way we expected it to happen. And I just more and more I saw what was happening in the crypto markets with ICOs starting to happen, like in very big ways. And I felt that there was just a better way to do it. So I felt, rather than be constrained by what was happening at Blockstream and all of the noise and the politics that was going on, I felt it was best to strike out on my own and just go ahead and focus full time on building a real solution to how to build decentralized applications.
Okay. Do you work as a core developer, a Bitcoin core developer, or are you not?
I don't call myself a Bitcoin core developer, but I follow all of the GitHub commits. I follow the mailing list. I follow the conversation. I haven't made any proposals. I've participated on the mailing list, but I haven't submitted any code yet.
Okay, so but you are a Bitcoin maximalist from what you said. Tell me, I always get these arguments. There are so many currencies that are technically better than Bitcoin, more performant. So why only
Sure.
Bitcoin?
So having followed Bitcoin for so long, I've seen so many of the technical conversations taking place about most of the ideas that some of these other companies are starting to try to build. And what I've seen is very reliably good engineering decisions being made by the people working on Bitcoin, and also the right philosophical approach of being very careful and conservative about designing a system that manages people's money, right? So ideologically, I really align with that conservatism, because it's other people's money. When you write code, you have to be very careful, because you're responsible for that.
So you are not very fond of these Bitcoin forks, for example, right?
No, I'm in favor of their right to fork if they fundamentally disagree with what's happening and they have an ideological split. I'm very strongly in support of their right to fork. But I have not seen a single fork to date that it matches the engineering prowess and strength and resilience of the main Bitcoin chain.
Okay. There are apparently projects in the crypto space that are interesting, that are maybe not coins,
Sure.
but that have intrinsic value, right?
Sure.
So what would you see as the interesting, exciting projects right now on the market?
Sure. I'm pretty excited about Mimblewimble. Mimblewimble is another anonymously proposed protocol. It's a more space-efficient way of managing a blockchain. But it also coincidentally is explicitly private, meaning a Mimblewimble-based blockchain would grant fungibility and privacy to users of such a system in a way that Bitcoin today does not do. That's probably the single project that I'm most excited about. But they also are launching their own blockchain, or some people are launching their own blockchain based on this idea called Grin, and it hasn't launched yet, but they're working on the implementation. I am, of course, excited about Lightning, which is another a way of using these payment channels to do instantaneous payments as opposed to waiting for block confirmations in a block. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about a couple of mesh network projects. Altea, I think they're doing an incentivized mesh network, which is something I'm pretty passionate about. Being able to pay people for participating in building the physical components of the network.
Yeah, exactly. So they need like these physical devices, like people need to carry them around. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. What about broad adoption or mainstream adoption? How do you think how far are we from the mainstream adoption of crypto or let's say Bitcoin?
I have a very long-term perspective on Bitcoin overall. I usually say 40 to 60 years for a full transition.
Okay.
So that's a very long time frame. But I think Bitcoin and crypto has started to enter mainstream consciousness, and people are aware of it. But the technology is not yet at a level where the average person can interface with it and have it be more convenient than what they're already using.
What do you think are the, let's say, three most important obstacles for mainstream adoption right now?
The number one, by a large margin, is user experience. And this is one of the reasons I'm excited about Lightning, is because it offers a much more compelling user experience because it offers instantaneous payments.
Okay.
Two is obviously liquidity and access to crypto. Right now, most of the crypto for the average person is locked up behind KYC and AML, behind like some sort of exchange, and you have to. And Forex is already pretty difficult, and with the regulatory capture associated with going through an exchange, it's really violating of people's rights and privacies, I think.
Absolutely.
So I think that's another huge barrier. And three is education. The education aspect, like people barely understand how money works already. And now that we're introducing this whole new system that has all of these different properties, the education aspect is just extremely challenging and difficult.
Yeah, but apparently Bitcoin itself has its problems, right? Scalability, fungibility. So I think these are also some roadblocks that need to be addressed, right?
Sure.
How and when do you think will these be solved?
I actually think that as far as the scalability question is concerned, I think we've made significant progress in the past 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So things like signature aggregation, parallelization of validation, all of that stuff in the core Bitcoin protocol has been wildly improved. Initial blockchain sync time, for example, is another big scalability question. The network can't really scale effectively if it takes too long to download the blockchain from zero and validate it and do so very quickly, because ultimately, in order to scale, you're going to need more full nodes. You need more people to route these systems. We've also made significant progress on the payment side, so Lightning, for example. I think we're probably about a year or two, we're probably about 2 years away from seeing a proper resurgence of this consumer to merchant payment mentality of people wanting to spend digital currency and use digital currency for all of the strengths and benefits that it provides. And fortunately, I think the technology is just about in time with that. So the Lightning mainnet, for example, is over almost 2,000 or 3,000 nodes now. So that's really exciting. And the final portions of figuring out exactly how routable payments are going to work in such a system, that's taking place as well. So as the technology matures, I think over that 2-year time frame, I think we're pretty much in step with, okay, now it seems like the technology and the general population will probably be ready in about a year to 2 years.
Okay, but this is scalability. What about the fungibility? And is Lightning Network working in the opposite direction of fungibility?
No, I actually think Lightning adds properties of privacy, which is really nice, because you can do payments, and there's no visibility into what that chain of payments was. At once you settle, like what happened in the meantime is invisible.
Yeah. Okay, so you don't see then when it is settled who paid whom, right?
That's exactly
right. You see just on the balance on the Bitcoin accounts, right?
Yep. But I think fungibility is like a very serious concern right now, because there is no good solution. I mean, we've made major advances in confidential transactions, for example, bullet proofs, which is another mechanism of using like Peterson commitments and so on to generate to have fungibility and totally confidential transactions. Mimblewimble is another very exciting technology, but I think fungibility is like the last big step towards Bitcoin becoming cash. Bitcoin is not a cash until it is fully private, because otherwise, how you choose to spend your money is free speech, and it's not cash until you can spend it in a way that you choose without oppression.
Right.
So it's a very serious challenge, but fortunately there's incredibly smart people working on it, and we've made a lot of progress. But the question of how do we get that merged in, and which is the correct technology is an open question.
Yeah, how do you see this process playing out between states and cryptocurrencies? Because not every country is very fond of cryptocurrencies, right? I mean, there are governments trying to somehow suppress it to limit the access, KYC,
Yep.
and so on. AML, of course. So how do you see it playing out?
I think it's a direct challenge. They come into direct competition. The objective of a government or a state is to govern their citizens, right? And hopefully they all believe that they're trying to do good for their citizens. But it comes into direct opposition with this idea of having private money.
Right.
So I think that there will be most of the larger countries will probably try to resist the adoption of this, or restrict the adoption of it as much as possible. But as just like with the crypto anarchist manifesto, it's now that the cat is out of the bag, the technology exists, that it really cannot be stopped. There will be some countries that are smart enough to realize that it would be in their best interest to adopt and support these technologies because it's better for their citizens. But how large institutions think, they typically build up a lot of momentum, and it makes them very myopic and resistant to that change because they have to give up power. And
yeah, of
that's
course,
something
but
they don't want to do.
Are you optimistic about crypto winning that conflict, or how do you see the...
I think, yes, it's inevitable. Crypto will absolutely win, and it's a matter of time. Like I said, I'm on a long-term time frame, 40 to 60 years, I think, for the full transition. But I'm fully convinced that digital currency is basically the only way forward for a truly free society to exist.
Okay. And I think paradoxically, the opposition of the major countries or the bigger countries may actually help the cryptocurrencies, because the adoption curve is growing actually faster than the technology, as we see, right?
Yeah.
So we need somehow something to limit that growth, because for the technology to catch up, actually, right?
Yeah, I think the needs will kind of encourage the technology to grow faster as well.
Yeah.
Most of the smart people that I know working on this stuff, they're impassioned, they're enriched by this idea of seeing all of the adoption. Of course, a lot of them are also very concerned at the misaligned promises that some of these projects have been making, like making claims that are just things that can't be done or are just way, like 10 or 15 years down the line. But at the same time, these people keep their heads down. They're not interested in politics. They're not interested in playing games on the markets. They're interested in building transformative technologies that help people. And I think ultimately the technology will be able to keep up, based on what I've seen over just even the past couple of years in Bitcoin alone, let alone all of the other various privacy and really liberty-based technologies that exist out there, like Tor and VPNs and all of onion routing in general, right?
Okay. What do you see the industries that will get affected by crypto technology, by blockchain technology in the next time, or where do you see the most impact? Financials is clear for everybody, banking and so on, but maybe other industries that you see as the next big markets for that technology.
Yeah, obviously, I think finance is definitely the biggest one that is going to be disrupted the fastest. but logistics and shipping, being able to track goods as they cross from one jurisdiction into another, and have a consistent and clear record of how things are flowing. I think fraud will be reduced in the shipping industry in like a very massive way as a result of this. I think the energy industry is one that I'm most excited about. I know that, I align energy and economic policy as very much one and the same. I mean, after all, energy is the most fundamental currency of the universe. So,
Right.
like, to have restrictions over how we produce and consume energy, I think cryptocurrency and blockchain technology in general, proof of work specifically, is already beginning to drive the conversation in terms of energy production and consumption. And I think that is perhaps the most radically transformative part of exactly what's happening.
But paradoxically, Bitcoin is known for like huge energy consumption. So,
Sure.
So this is somehow of a contradiction, right?
Well, I actually think the opposite
Well,
side of that.
okay.
If you look at all of the energy costs of the existing ecosystem, for example, a single ATM uses 700. The average ATM uses about 700 watts of electricity at rest, right? So I think just as the technology disintermediates, financial institutions,
Okay.
and all of those high energy costs currently associated. I mean, that's just ATMs. Then you think about all the buildings and all the people and all the paperwork and all the computer systems. That's a
Right.
massive amount of energy. And my thesis is that proof of work will ultimately be significantly less expensive than that entire system, and I think it even is today. And it
But
provides.
it's like proof of work. Is it like never-ending growing organism? Do you see like the end of the growth of the energy consumption in Bitcoin?
It's an S curve. So what happens is that once the energy cost of attacking the chain exceeds that of any one actor or group of actors, and their ability to quickly expend that amount of energy, that is about where the equilibrium will be established. So we'll see this growth in energy costs, which is where we're at today, and then a tapering off once the system is so secure that it's impossible for even a nation state to attack that system. There's no reason for that energy cost to go up any higher. So it will taper off and match exactly what the market demand for that security is.
But I don't understand the connection between the security of the protocol or Bitcoin reaching this level of security and the motivation of the miners, because their motivation is not for Bitcoin to be secure.
Sure.
Their motivation is monetary. There is this monetary impulse, right?
Sure.
behind it.
Well, there's a really interesting coupling between those two ideas, though, because if the system is not secure, then the currency that they're producing is worth less. Right? So if at any point the currency becomes less secure, the demand will decrease, because what people are looking for is a censorship-proof money. And the only thing that creates that censorship resistance, at least, is the amount of energy that's expended over time. So the miners are responsible for finding where the cheaper energy is to do the work, to provide the service that the users are looking for. So I think there's a correlation ultimately between the two, and that there will become an equilibrium between the demand for that immutability, the security of what proof of work provides, and the miner's ability to produce it. So I think it is very tightly coupled, actually.
So you were talking about this S-curve, so it will not grow exponentially anymore, it will be more flat or maybe
Yep.
logarithmically or something
Yeah,
like that.
sure.
So is it conceivable that also the price of Bitcoin will behave in the same way?
Yeah, I definitely think that we're going to see another 2 to 3 big bubbles in Bitcoin. And then ultimately, like once a significant amount of wealth and capital has flowed into Bitcoin, there's really not much other wealth out there that can flow into it. I mean, what we're probably going to be witnessing is the collapse of fiat in general, and that's where we'll see the big bubbles come from, is as global wealth moves into digital currency, and then we'll see a tapering out, and that will be when you start seeing like really wide-scale consumer adoption, because there's no longer the long-term promise of, oh, the price is going to go up and then I'm going to sell and then I'm going to be rich. That's not what it's about. It's about establishing a global, stable, sound money that people can use in commerce. And it doesn't really make sense to use an asset that can fluctuate so wildly. I mean, of course, I spend my Bitcoin in many cases because I like the idea of it.
Yeah, but most people don't.
But most people won't, because they're looking for the upside.
Yeah, exactly. So this is actually paradoxically, Gresham's law forbids Bitcoin to become a currency right now. Sure. Right? Because people just want to keep it, right?
Yeah.
They spend the worst currency, meaning dollars or the fiat, right? And they keep the better currency.
Yep.
Okay, so coming to last questions, you are a seasoned entrepreneur, or at first, you are in 5 years, since 5 years in this industry, or 6 years even. So what were the most surprising events in that industry for you?
Yeah.
And maybe what have you learned in that industry that was most non-intuitive?
Sure. So, before I even joined Blockstream, I worked at a company called BitPay. You might have heard of them as well.
Yeah.
They were very focused on the consumer-merchant payment relationship. I was very excited about Bitcoin as a currency when I was working for BitPay. I was very surprised to see that the adoption was so slow. There really was very little demand for people people didn't even know about Bitcoin at that time. So we were very early. So I was very surprised explicitly to see just how, and this is how I've sort of adopted my philosophy today, is that I was very surprised to see how long and how resistant to change so many people were. And that's why I kind of have adopted this, like, man, education is gonna take a long period of time. So that was a big surprise. My other big surprise is just how people are not paying attention to history, and look, like we were talking about Roger Ver and Bitcoinica and Mt. Gox. Mt. Gox
it happens over and over again.
It keeps happening.
Yeah.
Fortunately, fortunately, it has been less bad on the Bitcoin side, but we're seeing the same mistakes play out in other communities. So, for example, Ethereum, and people are just throwing money into these contracts, and then the money is gone, and it's gone. And this is, if people just did a little bit of reading and a little bit of research and were a little bit more careful, these same mistakes wouldn't happen. But at the same time, maybe everybody has to get burned by this once to learn the lesson.
So is that the reason why you don't invest in ICOs or in altcoins and stuff, or do you actually?
No, I exclusively hold Bitcoin right now,
okay.
And the reason is that I haven't really found any. I haven't found any technically interesting projects that make sense to diversify away from Bitcoin.
Okay.
If I'm going to invest my Bitcoin, then it has to outperform Bitcoin.
Outperform Bitcoin. This is also my philosophy, but I managed actually to outperform it with with altcoins. At least, I partly invested in other altcoins. So this is the standard, the gold standard, so to say.
Yeah.
You invest only if you can get more Bitcoin out of it.
That's exactly right. I moved, like, once I realized the long term, like what was going to happen over the long term.
Yeah.
I moved everything that I had into Bitcoin, and I closed down most of my bank accounts, and I got rid of all my paper money.
So you are really a maximalist. Okay, on the other hand, you are a seasoned entrepreneur. You founded several companies. You even sold a company recently. So in your business career, what were the lessons you have learned in that time? Let's say 3 or the most important lesson. What?
Really, just to listen to other people is the number one lesson. Like, not to think that I have to be the one to make all the decisions, but to find really good people that are better than me in various ideas, and make sure that that is where I'm getting my information from. The second is, especially, I mean, this is more of an entrepreneurship question, investor question, I think, but finding investors that provide more than just the money, but provide expertise and knowledge and share and contacts, networks, and share the passion about whatever the project is that you're working on. Because you can usually find money anywhere. We call it dumb money, right? But you want smart money, and you want people that are mutual, like not just invested in a monetary sense, but invested in the idea sense for your business.
Okay. Once a year, I do some predictions about what may happen in crypto in this year. What are your, let's say, non-intuitive predictions of events that may not necessarily, the prizes or whatever, but events that may happen in the crypto space in the coming months, maybe in the coming year?
Ooh, yeah. Okay, so
short, midterm, right?
Yeah, I don't want to take too many pot shots, but I think that there are some very precariously positioned, well-capitalized, but precariously positioned projects in the space right now.
That will fail.
That will fail in spectacular fashion. Okay. And this bothers me.
Could you say some names, or?
I mean, I really prefer not to, because I'm not here to divide people and make arguments or anything. But it's really just being conservative and being careful about what technologies you use. And if you're on the bleeding edge of technology right now, like all of these systems are being created for the very first time, and there's a lot of mistakes being made as well. There's going to be fireworks, and I'm stocking up on popcorn, so you can buy some popcorn stocks. If you want to invest in something, but it's going to be a wild ride. I think seeing what regulatory action is going to, what the governments are going to do, is going to be really, really interesting. We're already seeing some things coming out of the U.S. government in particular, enforcement actions.
So you think projects that are not community-based, but are like company-based or endangered in a special way?
I think companies that made claims that cannot be delivered on are in the most danger, and I think that there are quite a few of those out there right now. Selling something that has not, the technology hasn't been built, designed, let alone built, is very, I would call it scammy, actually.
Right. Selling even solutions for problems that haven't been solved, right?
Correct, exactly. Selling solutions to problems that haven't been solved, exactly right. I mean, many of these issues are, serious academic challenges that people have been working on for decades in some cases.
Yeah, but is Lightning Network not one of them, right?
I actually very strongly believe in Lightning. I understand how it works. I've looked at smart contracts and payment channels, and it's more of an engineering challenge than it is a computer science question, I believe.
Yeah. What about the routing of in Lightning? Is it an NP complete problem?
Yeah, there are some serious challenges in routing, but there are also several papers that actually have recently come out that propose very compelling solutions to these things. It also has been, routing is something that has been addressed in like BGP and TCP, for example. So we have ideas on how to approach this, but that's what I mean to say is it's an engineering challenge. We're working with a three-dimensional system as opposed to a two-dimensional system in a way. And so we have a couple of extra engineering questions that have to be addressed, and it really relies on going ahead and deploying a production network, which is why the main network is happening, so we can see the behavior in the real world to fully understand exactly, okay, what parts of the system need to be optimized more in order for it to scale more broadly. But I think fundamentally, Lightning has addressed all of the necessary challenges in terms of getting to becoming a usable payment system. Now there's a phrase, make it work, and Bitcoin itself proved that it can work, right? We can build payment channels on top of Bitcoin, okay? Make it right, Okay, that's really what Lightning is actually, okay, now we're going to build a network that uses the underlying settlement system and then make it fast. So make it work, make it right, and make it fast. And we're just in the transition between making it right and making it fast. So once we finish this stage...
So right is also, it would be also private or fungible,
That's
right?
correct, yeah.
So this is the second part of doing it right.
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
So we will get a way of actually using Bitcoin in a much more private way, without having to do a hard fork on the base layer.
So do you see space for private coins apart from Bitcoin?
Absolutely. In the meantime,
Okay.
I do not believe Bitcoin is finished until it is fully private.
Okay.
But the question of which technology, which tool to use, which cryptographic construction to be used, is a big point of discussion and debate.
Right.
We're still making advances on space efficiency of cryptographic proofs. We're still making advances on performance, which is another big question. Unfortunately, very recently there have been major advances that look very promising. But then the political question of how do you get that merged into Bitcoin is another very big question.
That's another question. So, and on the other hand, do you see space, or what do you think of DAG projects,
Sure.
non-blockchain based currencies? And
I'm actually really excited about DAGs. I think it's a really interesting approach. But because it's so new, I think it needs a lot of time to mature. And I'm hopeful that they can do so quickly, so we can see a fair comparison.
Yeah.
But I'm not investing in such projects right now because I remain very skeptical of their applicability in an adversarial environment.
Oh, I see. So general of the security, right?
Yes.
Because this is actually the major challenge for this project, right? I don't know of any project in that space that is truly decentralized.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so the very last question, any message to the viewers, to the crypto community, anything, any advice maybe you would like to give, or say something to the world?
I mean, obviously, just all of the same basic things, right? Like, do your research, hold your own keys. Don't trust. If you don't hold the keys, you don't own the money.
Right.
Be very conservative and skeptical of new projects that are coming out. Look for the review and advice of experts as much as possible, and learn. Every day you should be learning, because this is such a broad space with so many different technologies and ideas, and you need the ability to make judgment calls for yourself.
Exactly. So you should, you should decide yourself. Have the knowledge and the understanding. But by the way, when you say listen or get information from expert,
Sure.
who do you think is the most insightful person in this space, or who you like to listen to, or to
It's hard to say. There are so many different domain-specific, so many different subjects. I think that there's about 10 to 15 really good people that I like to listen to. I think Jameson Lopp, for example, shares a lot of really good ideas, very clear commentary, discerning. Let's see, Andrew Polstra is usually who I follow in terms of cryptography and mathematics. Some of the people that I really like don't talk so much. They're more quiet, so I pay attention to the mailing lists of pretty much anything. Like Peter Wool will say. Peter Wool is one of the utmost. I have the utmost respect for him. That's probably the top three for me.
Okay.
But yeah, Jameson is perhaps the most vocal and talks more publicly, I would say. So.
Okay, Eric. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your time.
Sure.
I wish you success
Thank you.
in this conference, and of course for your ventures, for your projects.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
And see you from New York. I can see you like this video. If yes, give me a thumb up, subscribe below, and don't forget to hit the bell button in order not to miss my other videos. I encourage you to leave comments what you think about the topics we were talking about what is your experience, what is your perspective. I invite you also to share this video with your loved ones, with your friends. One day they will thank you for that. And I promised competition at the beginning of this video. Let's do the following. Take a quote from this video and share it on your social media, on your Twitter, on your Facebook, or share it with your comment to this video. And when sharing, don't forget to add your Byteball address and also the tag #the $1 billion secret. We will monitor social media, and among the best shares, the most creative shares, the most effective shares, I will give away some Byteball bytes. So if you like this video, you will probably like my other videos. Here you will find some of my best films. That's it from New York today. I wish you a fantastic day. Let's do something extraordinary today.